Please subscribe to Facetv Africa and turn the notification on. Facetv Africa, ẹ jọ̀ọ́ ẹ subscribe hete.
Face TV was Swoby.
Was fine. Yeah, one of the attorneys involved in fighting against the abuses of human rights of activists in the IPOB family, as we call them, the indigenous people of Biafra. And you are in Nigeria today, after you were denied access to Nnamdi Kanu, we can call him your client.
Yes, correct.
By the department known as the State Security Services in Nigeria, but they self-style themselves as the Department of State Services. So we call them DSS as a result, but their real name is DSS. I think when they discovered that they started acting like the Hitlerites in Germany, the SSS or that
Right,
era,
yes.
they tried to change, but they haven't characteristically changed. So what happened yesterday? Just tell people what was your encounter like for the first time when Nigerians saw with this major security behemoth known as the SSS.
I'd like to begin by underscoring that we did everything according to the judge's order, which permits Nnamdi's lawyers to visit on Mondays and Thursdays. The order is categorical. It doesn't say we need to be escorted or, it's dependent upon any particular presence of the DSS at the facility. And adequate notice was given by Ejiofor that I would be one of the two lawyers to visit Nnamdi on Thursday to discuss his legal case, which has enormous ramifications, not only for Biafra and Nigeria itself, but internationally, since it involves, among other things, the kidnapping and torture of someone who's then later detained. So we drove to the facility, I did with Ejiofor. It's not all that what I would call user-friendly. You see people carrying very, very advanced weapons on your way into the facility. But they didn't disturb us. We went and we checked in, as was proper. Didn't make any noise or commotion. We went and sat in a waiting room. Ordinarily, it's about 5 minutes before you're permitted to see the individual you're authorized to consult. And after about 15 or 20 minutes, a gentleman entered and announced, not very convincingly, that the person who was supposed to escort us down the hallway was on a special assignment, and therefore we couldn't visit with Nnamdi. Now, he didn't say that with much conviction, and moreover, the plausibility of that being true is highly remote. There was days advance notice given of my presence with Ejiofor to speak to Nnamdi about his legal case. This is not something that happened at the 11th hour. And so you have to ask, why did he just make up, which is clearly a falsity, to justify denying access to Nnamdi Kanu? We're not talking about doing anything in violation of law. It's trying to vindicate the rule of law, human rights law, and his rights as an individual, and also the rights of all Nigerians, not just arbitrary tyranny. So this was a very, very important meeting to have. It wasn't to undermine any system of law whatsoever. And so we were escorted out of the building and returned quite dumbfounded that there would be such a brazen lie told. Because it's fanciful to say you have somebody on special assignment. There are literally hundreds of other persons there that could escort us to the detention facility. Yes. It's not like you need high energy physics training to walk down a hallway, open a door. That's pretty simple, even for elementary school children. So I think that I have deduced, and I think Ejiofor would as well, that the Nigerians are frightened of the United States and me in particular. I've done nothing other than just argue law in cases. Indeed, you would think that the Nigerians now and the government struggling with restructuring, trying to evoke confidence that you can trust their pledges, whatever they are, in trying to revamp this dispensation would be going out of their way to give confidence that they'll comply with court orders. This undermines any public confidence, Biafrans, Yoruba, anyone. Well, if they can just flout the law so blatantly and without even embarrassment. Number one, the court order said nothing about being escorted. We were there according to the court order. And two, it wasn't even a good falsehood because it was so blatantly contrived at the 11th hour. But that doesn't mean we're going to be any less assertive in demanding the rights that Nnamdi Kanu is entitled to. In fact, all Nigerians are entitled to. We expect to return on Monday, consistent with the court order, and also suggesting to the court that the Nigerian government is in contempt. The order had nothing to do with people being on special assignment or not. We showed up. We didn't have any arms. There were nothing that we were doing that was disruptive or threatening, and they said no. So we're very disappointed that this looks another step backwards away from the rule of law and further earmark of the kind of tyranny that Nnamdi Kanu and Biafrans are revolting against today. And I say revolting not in the sense necessarily of doing anything more than self-defense, but saying we can't live under this situation. And an American whose own Declaration of Independence identifies grievances we had against King George III. You know, the grievances, if you look at one, no taxation without representation, you know, did people get designated as terrorist organizations? There's no hearing, there's no law, there's nothing. And all the occupations of any power in the government are all filled by Fulani. It's obviously that there's ethnic, religious discrimination ongoing. It's far more acute than anything that provoked our American Revolution. And so we have a natural sympathy for the ambitions and quests. It's not because we have any anger or necessarily hostility towards the Fulani. Hey, they're human beings like others. But if you can't mix together in any way that respects equal rights, then you got to build fences. We once had a very famous poet named Robert Frost, and he said, "Good fences make good neighbors." You know, good boundaries make good neighbors. And so we need to go back and think about, well, is it time to re-examine, you know, the sensibility and the honoring of human rights, the right of self-determination, by questioning the boundaries that really are nothing more than a legacy of colonial powers in Europe that didn't have a clue of what they were doing when they drew the boundaries and didn't have an interest at all in the welfare of those whom they were ruling over. They just drew laws everywhere, you know, in Paris and Berlin or whatever, and said, okay, those are the boundaries. Well, you can always renegotiate boundaries, and they say it's not novel. We recently witnessed in 2011 the South Sudanese, with a referendum, voted to secede from Sudan. Now, it doesn't mean that everything is perfect, but at least you don't have the conflict that was ongoing previously. And even before then, the United Nations organized a referendum in what was then called Southwest Africa, now Namibia, to basically secede from South Africa. So these kinds of secession movements are not unusual. In Great Britain recently, Scotland voted as to whether they wanted to secede. In Canada, Quebec voted whether they want to secede. These are fundamental rights of self-determination. And there's nothing that is treasonous or antithetical to democracy about having this kind of referendum determining the boundaries and fate of countries. You know, the international system is a lot like a petrified forest that never changes. It does change, and it should change in response to claims of justice.
The U.S. typically would have active position on the issue of Biafra agitation, but the U.S. has been unusually quiet, you know, in terms of international policy on Biafra. What do you think is responsible for that? You've been a high-level U.S. official before. What's going on?
Well, I think after 9/11, there was great ambivalence in the United States about any group that was called a terrorist organization, no matter how fanciful. And it wasn't just limited to Nigeria, Sri Lanka, and even in the Uyghurs in China. That was the tactic that the international community knew would get the United States to be worried if they identified any group as a terrorist organization once we declared war everywhere in the world and in the galaxy against terrorism. And I think that the United States, because it said that Boko Haram is terrorists. We need the assistance of the government to fight the radical Islam. And they don't really understand, Biafrans are largely Christian. There's nothing radical about, their history or anything of that sort. And because Nigeria is not what I would call a top-tier issue, where you have people focused on it, because the United States at present is worried about Afghanistan, the Uyghurs in China, the South China Sea, issues with Chechens in Russia, and Iran's nuclear weapons. So it doesn't get the kind of concentrated attention that you've discussed that would enable us to be more sophisticated about what's going on here. And that's why I think the Nigerian government was kind of frightened of my appearance, because in some sense, I'm here as part of my role to surface and internationalize the plight of the Biafrans, indeed all Nigerians living under tyrannical government. And that's what they worry about. They think they can obfuscate enough and then push it into the back burner area and say, oh, we're fighting terrorism, so we need weapons to fight terrorism, even though the weapons are diverted to killing civilians. And because there isn't high-level concentrated focus on the issue, they can get away for it, at least for a time. But they can't get away for it forever. Justice will not sleep. And that's, to say, part of my mission here and back in the United States is precisely to make sure justice doesn't sleep when it comes from Biafrans.
But that did not apply to the Niger Delta militancy. Someone could say, well, it was because the U.S. was interested in oil, so they were all ears when the militancy was going on in the Niger Delta region. But the same is not applicable to the Biafrans now.
Well, there's some truth in that, to be sure. I mean, there's no doubt that the United States historically has blinked and squinted at countries that supply oil. I mean, most dramatically is Saudi Arabia. They even assassinate our journalists, and we continue to sell weapons to Nnamdi, the crown prince. And everybody, the CIA has concluded, yeah, he was the one who orchestrated the assassination of Jamal Khashoggi. But I don't want to suggest that it's dispositive of the issue, oil. I mean, in some sense, the United States has come upon great discoveries of natural gas through fracking and oil. We don't import oil anymore. So the ability to use the oil weapon, if you will, to leverage policy out of the United States is much, much diminished. I do not think that is what is going to be decisive as the United States will be confronting what is this policy towards Nigeria. I do think the human rights issue and the concern about having Nigeria turn into somewhat like a failed state. They're worried now more so because they see Afghanistan and Taliban. Are we going to have a resurgence of Al-Qaeda? If you end up with Nigeria, all Sharia states, and the government completely controlled by the Fulani radicals, that will be very, very, very problematic for the United States. We already know that the United States has some inkling because we've had a handful of special forces die in Mali, Chad, Burkina Faso, Niger, and maybe in the future in Cameroon because of the spillover effects of the Boko Haram radical terrorists into neighboring countries in West Africa. And that problem is going to be multiplied manyfold if this government is able to succeed in basically suppressing all dissent and having it totally operated by Fulani who believe that power ought to come out of the barrel of a gun. The plundering and killing Biafrans is the livelihood. That's not a formula for anything but chaos and upheaval in Nigeria, which does nothing but help the terrorists.
You once filed some cases at the International Criminal Court against some Nigerian officials. Can you give us an update about that? Well,
it's difficult because the International Criminal Court that sits in The Hague, it's not like they're open is what they're doing. What we charged General Buratai and President Buhari with genocide, crimes against humanity. They take the filing, they stamp it, and they even the actual clerks at the ICC are sufficiently fearful of retaliation. They don't even give you their names. They have no. You walk in and they have numbers on them. That's all. So we just know that our filing was not the sole one charging the leadership of the government with genocide. It's an ongoing investigation. Now, we filed at a time when the chief prosecutor was from Gambia. They've shifted the chief prosecutor, but that doesn't mean that the evidence is any different. We will be alerted, but oftentimes I say, There's difficulty because the government that's charged with these crimes doesn't cooperate. You had something very similar in Kenya, where the president of Kenya was intimidating witnesses, and the case kind of went away because it couldn't get witnesses to testify. So that's what makes the need, in my judgment, beyond the International Criminal Court. And I don't want to sound boastful as an American, but if the United States doesn't get involved and behind it, it's not going to happen. It's as simple as that. We basically have all the cards right now because we have and that's why it's critical to get the United States on board and alert to what the danger to U.S. interests are if Nigeria ends up as a haven for terrorists. I mean, remember one of the most famous terrorists in the United States, Abdul Muhammad, he was a Nigerian who went and he was radicalized. He flew to Yemen and then he was trying to blow up an airplane on Christmas Day, and he was caught by a passenger. So we have first-hand experience in the United States with the possibility of terrorism blossoming, if you will, in Nigeria, in creating a direct danger to our own citizens.
You also have taken up the role of ensuring that Nigeria doesn't get sold more weapons from the U.S. They already had delivery of about 6 to Kanu jets, and I think there are 6 other ones on the way. So do you think you're going to make any progress, any success in that? Or
well, the lawsuit is outstanding. We haven't had an answer from, say, we sued the Secretary of State there, Tony Blinken, who's responsible for certifying that the weapons will not be in the hands of security forces guilty of egregious human rights violations. That's the U.S. law. It's called the Leahy law because there's a famous senator, Pat Leahy from Vermont, who's the sponsor of these prohibitions. We haven't received an answer yet. They still have time under our federal rules, but we're also working in Congress at any time, irrespective of what the executive branch decides. And remember, this was a decision made by President Trump, not President Biden. He's President Biden, unfortunately, because he's got other things he's preoccupied with, I think has permitted this sale to move forward, even though at a slower pace than otherwise. But Congress can ban, the sale at any time and demand the return at any time by statute. There, I think we have already made approaches and overtures. Chris Smith of New Jersey is very, very concerned about the human rights situation in Nigeria. And there is also a considerable portion of Christians in the Congress who are very worried that the Biafrans are the most persecuted group of Christians on the globe and have spoken out against the genocide for that reason. So it isn't just the lawsuit, but it's created an interest and sparked concern in Congress because it surfaces what otherwise would go under the radar screen, which is what Nigeria wants. The more we can get sunlight on what's happening, the better it is for human rights for everyone, so to speak. And I say that's what's, it's disappointing, but speaks volumes that it's obvious the Nigerian government is trying to suppress, all the evidence, which is almost a concession. They know if sunshine was cast, it would be very unfavorable to them.
So another point is Nnamdi Kanu kidnapped practically from Kenya. Surprisingly, the international media is quiet about this. What do you think is responsible for that? This is a kind of atrocity committed, by state or non-state actors that would normally attract breaking news headlines all over the world, but not much is heard out, about that outside of the Nigerian media locally. What are you doing about making sure that this particular part of the story is told to the world? That a citizen of the UK, not the Nigerian at this point, is dual citizen, but he was carrying a UK passport, gets kidnapped from his base in Kenya, probably drugged and flown, with an unmarked plane outside of Kenya to Nigeria. We just found out one day that he's here. We don't know the second. Nobody can tell the full story. Do you have something to tell those who are watching what really happened?
Well, I think there are a couple of explanations, if you will, not justifications. One, you have to remember that in this globalized community, the Nnamdi Kanu story is competing against literally volumes of other stories that are capturing attention. Say, the evacuation of Afghanistan, it was like 24-hour news for a whole week, and will continue on until all the evacuations of those who were, in some sense, siding with the U.S. during the war. And we have articles every day about China and the Uyghurs there, and excluding goods made with forced labor. Anyway, I could recite a whole litany of other news stories, and you got to remember, you're competing with all these other stories. The news angle is just something fresh. But that's not the sole explanation. I think also that it is very important, because the news media is like other organizations. You got to push and shove to get something before them. They aren't going to naturally gravitate and undertake on their own initiative things that the reporters or that they don't know about. And I do think that it's an important component of us here to reach out. I've reached out to the Washington Post reporters, and we got a story about the Super Tucano lawsuit for that reason. But you have to have an outreach media effort. Otherwise, unless the story is a nuclear bomb or something, it doesn't get into their radar screen. And that's part of the public advocacy effort, is to meet with the reporters, explain, give them background, have press kits so they are able to understand. For most Americans, we're sitting in Abuja. They wouldn't know Abuja is the capital of Nigeria. And you talk to them about the House of Fulani, and their heads start to spin. So part of our role and obligation is to educate in a way that is understandable and digestible by our audiences there. And that's another thing that we need to remember in this whole campaign. The human mind reasons by analogy, and if you're speaking to an American audience, you can't say Python Dance 2 and they'll understand what it is. You have to say, oh, it was like the Battle of Manassas and the Civil Wars. Oh, okay, now I get it, because we do have an American audience who knows what a Civil War is about. So it has that kind of skill that enables you to penetrate the otherwise different histories and cultures of the two nations. And that's an important ingredient. Not the sole one, of course. But that's, and news can sometimes be very flukish. You remember a couple of years ago, there was a social media event about the Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, and it just went, it went viral. Nobody really knew why. And then it stopped, and now it's off. No one's read about the Lord's Resistance Army for 2 or 3 years. You don't know what's happening. So those things also, we don't have real explanations for, but we need to be always out there with a story to tell. So when the time is right, it does able to take off in the news media, the social media, and otherwise.
While you're here, supposing the Nigerian government invites you to a meeting to say, hey, let's talk about why you're here, would you be willing to meet with them?
Of course, I'd meet with anybody interested in the rule of law. This is not about vengeance. No, justice really is international, and everybody recognizes the right to self-determination, to due process. It's universally condemned. Torture is extrajudicial killings. And sit down and say, listen, I have an expertise in constitutional law. And it seems very odd to me from the United States that Nigeria lives under a constitution ordained by a military dictator in 1999 with no input from the public. No referendum, nothing. And you're still living under this, 22 years later? To me, it seems utterly absurd. How does that document have legitimacy? How do you give legitimacy to a legal instrument so that it'll be complied with, rather than just manipulated, to benefit those who have the power? But I'm always someone who believes in Winston Churchill, better to jaw than war. Sit down. We have a very professional conversation. We know what are the issues, how are we going to address them. They have ideas. I'm not claiming I'm omniscient. People can learn from one another, but that's the way, that really is the heart and soul of civilized governance. It's communicate, discourse, listen. Nobody should believe that they might not be wrong. I could be wrong, they could be wrong. That's why we need to talk it out. and see whether we can come to some consensus as to at least the optimal way to deal with inevitable differences between people.
So, apart from Nnamdi Kanu, there are a lot of Biafran activists or militants, as the Nigerian government wants them referred to, who are detained all over. Are you doing anything to help with this situation as well in an international attorney involved?
Well, I think they, in some sense, to promote and argue for the rule of law helps everyone. That's due process doesn't know any color barrier, doesn't know any religious barrier, doesn't know any territorial barrier. I mean, that's what I think it's the heart and soul of civilization itself. Due process. I could be wrong. Listen to both sides. Have a neutral adjudicator decide where the rights lie, and that's it. And that's why everybody is the beneficiary of that system, and that's what I would hope could be brought to bear in Nigeria. After all, it's the most populous country in all of Africa. It has great opportunities, but ultimately, the fate of nations depends upon what I call the human capital, even more than oil or diamonds or gold. We know lots of countries, even in Nigeria, some, you can be blessed with huge resources, and if it's all a corrupt system, it all gets squandered, and the people are impoverished anyway. And it's the human capital that consists not only of the ability to make money, but an ability to get along with each other through mechanisms of law, so that disputes are resolved legitimately without resort to violence. And that's something that I think is urgent in Nigeria.
There's a flip side to all this. You are in Nigeria. This is the land of a dictator. Supposing they grab you and put you on a plane to go back to the U.S., what do you say to that?
Well, I would be disappointed. But I am very humble. I live in the United States, which has enormous flaws. But I get up. I live literally within one block of the Congress and the U.S. Supreme Court. I walk to work and am awed by our forefathers who were able to craft a system that protected liberty. And I understand that you here in Nigeria, in the Biafrans, you're taking far more risks than me. It's just an accident. It's a fluke. I happen to be born in the United States. I'm glad that it was, but I certainly didn't have any responsibility for that. It just happened. So you can't make progress, unless you take some risks. It's not, you don't do foolish risks, but there's an old saying that a tortoise makes its progress only by sticking out its head. Mm-hmm. Otherwise, it stays in its shell. Mm-hmm. And so that's the attitude that I have. I certainly would not welcome it, but if it happens, it happens. Others have suffered far more grievously than that.
And one of the issues, one of the things you talked about in this conversation is the fact that most U.S. citizens live in this kind of bubble regarding what's happening outside. They will have, if you're looking at them today, you can have them just listen to what you have to say. How can you break this down to them that, this is one part of the world, Nigeria, where egregious atrocities are being committed, against a few people, a set of people, not few, lots of people, and this didn't start today. Between 1967 and 1970, year before I was born, over 6 million people had to be killed for the same reason, just to keep Nigeria united, as they claimed at that time. And today we're back on the verge of another civil war. What can you have told them before they start contributing money on CNN for refugees and all that, to just get the message across to them that we're on the verge of another atrocious war?
It's a challenging issue of human nature. If you're too sanctimonious and try to preach to them and say, listen, you should be involved, you're lucky, people resist that. So you have to be very tactful and say, we really do have a responsibility when we know evil is ongoing, at least to denounce it, to not be complicit in it, because at some point silence becomes complicit. And that this is a way, and everybody has a different way in which they can try to advance the cause of justice. some can be contributions, some can just be standing protests, telling your children about what's happening there, and we shouldn't be supporting that. And obviously, even in the United States itself, writing a member of Congress and saying we shouldn't be selling weapons, the Super Tucano, those small ways to indicate in their own protocols their opposition. Everybody has different competing demands on their time, but I say it requires tact. You can't come in and preach and tell them, okay, I'm Jesus, I'm Moses, I'm Muhammad, and you need to do X, Y, Z. That's going to work. You have to be more indirect, suggesting, we're very fortunate in the United States, and we don't have to worry about a knock on the door or a house being burned down the next day. But that's all the more reason that we ought to be concerned with the plight of others who do confront those kinds of dangers. And you'll feel better for yourself that you helped the world become a little better place. We have our architect of the Constitution, James Madison, he said that the end of civil society is justice. That's why we have civil society, is justice. So we all need to be engaged in that particular quest as at least part of our vocation between ashes to ashes and dust to dust.
I wish I could ask, what is the end of justice?
Yeah.
Well, it's somewhere around here. Let me just turn to Barrister Ejiofor for a second. You had been going through some disturbing level of, I would say, violation of your right as a lawyer and privacy. Each time you send a team down to the DSS office, you were stripped almost naked before you could see it. What do you have to say to that? What's been the experience in the last few visits?
Thank you so much. I'm pleased with the fact that the media world refers to DSS now as lawless outfit, because it's something they have a history of flouting court orders. And I'm proud that people are also reporting to him. We are aware that when he was abducted in Kenya, when our client Nnamdi Kanu was abducted in Kenya, specifically on the 19th of June 2021, and subsequently brought here through extraordinary rendition on the 26th of June. He was taken to court with a reference to us on the 29th of June. So, and consequently, the court adjourned the matter to the 26th of July for hearing, and ordered that we should start with hearing notices about the proceedings of that day. And on 26th, we were in court. Ordinarily, if they were civil, they would have respected the court directives and also bring him to court on that day. But he was not brought to court on 26th of July. That is very just time. So, and very appalling that the DPP who was in court for the federal government informed the court that the DSS could not come to bring him to court because of logistic reasons. So, we have been in this game before with them, and we understand how they operate. So, and we informed the court because we know fully well how they operate. Now, we need an order of court on the guideline for visiting him pending when the matter is before the court again. And the court made an order that they should allow the lawyers access to him and also relatives access to him. Consequently, adjourned to the chambers for further visitation. So during the chamber sitting, it was before the DSS was also represented by one of the operatives, who is also a lawyer. The federal government was also represented by DPP and also a counsel in the matter, Labaran Tribe. I was there, and two of my colleagues were also part of us. We have an understanding as to manner in which he will be visited, and that becomes an order of court. It was agreed that we'll be visiting him on Mondays and Thursdays between the hours of 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. At that point, it became an order of court, the manner in which he will be visited. So DSS has no right whatsoever powers to determine the manner in which he will be visited after the court has given an order. Then we went to court to visit him in line with the order of court. We had denied access to him. We went back to court 5 and 4 to commit DG of SSS for contempt. And when they were served with the contempt proceedings we initiated before the Federal High Court, they quickly called us to come and see him, because they understand the implication of that. We went back to the DSS, and then also altered. They altered the order, the terms of the order of the court, by stating that we should notify them in advance as to who and who is coming, and when we are coming. We have no problem because our interest is just to guarantee his safety. For the meantime, he will be in the custody of the SS. So we told them that we should notify them in advance. So several who have gone there on this visit. We don't think we have much issue with them before now. So, and also before Mr. Bruce arrived from US, I notified them that he will be coming. It's Saturday. Mr. Bruce is a non-constitutional lawyer in US, and he has been IPOB lawyer for so many years over there, and also personal counsel to Nnamdi Kanu. So he flew to Nigeria to visit his client and also discuss legal matters with him, which is within his constitutional right. So, and we notified the DSS about his coming. They will not say they are not away, only for us to be treated with this day, because even the messenger who conveyed the message was panting, obviously, to show you that it wasn't connecting in his message. He was actually trying to find the excuse to give us, not to see him. Because usually when you come and introduce and inform them we are around to see him, it doesn't take more than 10 minutes for them to check us in and also have a chat with him. So but yesterday something ordinary happened. As they mentioned, Mr. Bruce, the white man, is around to see him with Barrister Uniform. This whole situation became tense, and I believe they started scouting for reasons. So to give us, excuse to give us for not to see him yesterday. But I know that it's not far-fetched from the manner in which lawyers we have been subsequently subjected to all forms of inhuman treatment and deprivation in the course of visiting him. So, for the past 4 times we visited him, we are mistreated, we are maltreated by the DSS officials, we are treated like criminals. And because when you ask a professional, a lawyer, to remove his shoes, his belts, his earrings, and also fondle some part of his body, one applicable to woman, trying to search for incriminating substance, I believe something condemnable. And I've notified the NBA president about what you are passing through. Unfortunately, I believe you have done the bad work on, because I told him that you NBA have to speak out about it. I told him, look, I sent to him about what lawyers are being subjected to. And we need to be protected. Lawyers need to be protected. I don't see reason why we should be subjected to that kind of form of treatment in the course of this our client. It's an order by the court, and also supported by the law, because we should visit to discuss this case with him. Assuming the matter is coming up, because assuming the matter comes for trial anywhere before the time adjourned for the trial for the hearing, how are I going to get set for? How are you going to get for trial without discussing with him? And he cannot be visited under the atmosphere of fear and intimidation. That is forbidden. We should have a lifetime. I don't have a polite environment to have a discussion, have a chat with him, with our client. So, and if a lawyer, it's very highly unprofessional for a lawyer to visit a client with an incriminating substance. It is forbidden. That cannot be contemplated at all whatsoever, which we have not done before, and we cannot do it because we respect the profession. We go here with relatives. Even my right and mattress, we are usually armed. We are being denied. We are not allowed to come in with right mattress. We are not allowed to come in without our shoes. Our belts are being asked to remove. You just fold your belt as if you're a criminal. Somebody is there undergoing investigation. You know what it means when you are sent to Nigerian investigative authority, police, DSS, whatever I call it. First thing they will do to criminals is to remove your slippers, remove your belt, remove your watch, remove your cap and everything. This is my cap, I'll remove it. They say, okay, go ahead, follow here, follow, march, go, as if you're a criminal. That's how we have been treated. I've not seen such in the case of my practice as a lawyer. But that notwithstanding, no problem. And I want my friend, my partner from US, a non-lawyer, to also witness them yesterday. But unfortunately, because they won't want the to go to the US, they won't want the to fly outside this country. They were being smart. And I know it, on Monday we are going back again. So let me see if they will tell us that maybe probably the person who's in charge or who will receive us now is having stomach upset. And in that case, Mr. Bruce, you have to delay your travel and wait until when the man is fully recovered. So thank you so much, Mr. Sowore. Thank you also for your support and being there for our client. Thank you.
No problem. One last question I'd like to ask you, and this new journalist is just coming in my ask. Any recourse to any form of relief within international law at this point?
Yes, there is.
Yes.
There is a working group on arbitrary detentions that's an arm of the UN Human Rights Council that sits in Geneva. And I think Nnamdi's case fits arbitrary detention like a glove. I mean, among others, Julian Assange is listed. And the working group has authority to pronounce as a matter of international law whether a detention is illegal, which would ordinarily taint and exclude any evidence that is obtained because or a result of the illegality. So that clearly is one forum for relief for what's transpiring for Nnamdi Kanu today, and I would hope to pursue that angle. And of course, one element of the arbitrariness of the detention is what we experienced yesterday, denying him access to his counsel pursuant to a court order, which was complied with on our side with great scrupulousness. And so that forum and platform does remain available.
Well, I want to thank you. I hope on Monday you go there with pants that don't use belts.
Thank you so much, Olin. It's a pleasure having you once again.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming. May God bless you all. Thank you so
Do
much.
you have any questions?
Yes, I wanted to answer Nnamdi Kanu.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead.
Yes. On the opportunity you have to visit him, how is his health condition? Is he okay? Is he feeling okay? Because I heard that his health situation is also deteriorating.
Okay, of course, you should know that somebody who is in that kind of confinement should not be okay. So it's commonsensical. And apart from the fact that he was subjected to all forms of inhuman treatment and degradation while he was arrested and detained and abducted in Kenya. We are fully aware he was taken to another destination where he was tortured and he was beaten and also inflicted with severe pains and injuries before he was smuggled into Nigeria by the extradition expedition. So he's still he's fully to recover from that from the impact. And so, but he's receiving treatment. But that notwithstanding, because we don't know the level of contact he had with people that maltreated him in Kenya, tortured him in Kenya. So that's why we're actually asking the court to allow an international expert, medical expert, to also to examine him from foreign land. One of his doctors who are coming from overseas to examine him. It's before the court, appearing before the court now. So because we cannot rely on what they're doing here, but it's okay, reasonable, stable, firm, and also a sound health, sound mental wise, and Mr. Bruce will have a lot of seeing that and also confirming that on Monday when you see him. So, but we still need and expect advanced medical attention to be given to him in which within the period of time we'll be with them. So because where he is now, of course, you know, somebody who is being denied access to friends and also to relatives, apart from this junior brother who has seen him once, he understands the kind of thinking, what's going on in his head. There's nothing like, no torture can be compared with that. When you don't watch televisions, you don't, as such people, we alone kept somewhere, allowed once in a while to move around and also interact. I don't think is a mental torture, which I believe should be more grievous than even the one, somebody who is hospitalized. Because when you are in the hospital, you are talking with people. But in this case, you are not allowed to have contact with somebody. You are there apart from when the lawyers come to visit you. So he's being subjected to inhuman, to mental torture. And I want the authority to understand that part, that he's being tortured today in the actual sense of faith. So, and I also made it known to the world that he cannot stand trial while being detained in DSS. That cannot happen because we cannot effectively defend him and also interact with him and get his brief under this kind of environment. It can't happen. So of course you have witnessed what part of what we are saying, and I believe by Monday you see the rest and also confirm to yourself. So let's see how it goes. I may not go further on this because we have other strategies to adopting in court that will assist our case. So thank you so much. I know I've taken to your question.
Yes, thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Sorry. I know you said this before, but we came late. Just briefly, just tell us how you were treated when you visited your clients at the custody of the DSS. Briefly.
Please subscribe to Face TV Africa and turn the notification on. Face TV Africa, subscribe,
Face TV was Swoby.